Okay, welcome to video number 3 in our Project 2 series. So for this project, we are going to apply what we learned from chapter 14, which is the box model. So basically, we're going to apply our margins and paddings to get the spacing that we want. So as we look at our site right now, it's a little rough. Like we have this awkward space here and here. Our book tickets button, the background color is so close to the text. So we're going to look at spacing things out with margin and padding. So, and we might be using our developer tools to see this too. So keep in mind, you can always look at your developer tools in Chrome. It's the 3 dots at the top corner. You go to More Tools, Developer Tools, and in here we can use our little selection tool right up here. Whoa. All right, our little selection tool, and we can hover over things and see their margin, padding, border, everything. So the blue is the content box. So for example, this is my Dive into the Art H2. The H2 is the blue, and then the orange is the margin that's applied to this H2. Okay. Right now, I don't think we have any padding. Our lists probably do. I think lists by default, lists by default have a little bit of padding on the left. That's where the indent comes from when you create a list, right? A bulleted list, or numbered list, it usually indents a little bit to the right. And they're doing that with padding. So the list, unordered list element actually has inherent styling already applied to it by default from the browser with padding. So if things aren't spaced correctly in your site, you will probably use this developer tools to hover over and see where that awkward space is coming from. So I'm just going to close this for right now, and we are going to get started. So we're starting from where we left off. I'm going to scroll back up to my top of my CSS as well as my HTML because I like to work top bottom. So the first part is actually the body. So by default, the body has margin applied to it, and that's where this little space around the whole edge of the body is coming from. I don't like that. I want my background colors and my background images to just go straight to the edge, so I'm going to get rid of that margin. So I'm already calling to my body element in my CSS. So I'm going to come into that style rule, and I'm going to select the margin, and I'm going to turn it to 0. Basically, get rid of it. And now we'll see that all my background colors and my images, or the background images, are nice and to the very edge. And this is something that I add to pretty much every website I do. I target the body and I change the margin to 0. All right. Now let's look at our header. So our header has that background color. If we make the screen bigger, the text is all the way left aligned and it's pretty much touching the left border of the browser. I don't want it to do that. I want it to have some space to it. So I want it to basically look like this, where it will have some nice space that can grow and shrink with it depending on the size of the browser. Okay, so I'm going to target the header, which I already am. Actually, if we target the header and give it padding, it's not going to work. Let's see. I'll show you. So I want to apply, I want to constrain the width of the header, the H1 and the nav. I want to make sure that they are in the center of the browser and they have a max width applied to them. So let's try it. Let's do a max width, and I'll just do 1440 pixels. It's like a standard screen size, and then we'll have a look at it at that width. And we'll see that it's now, since I applied it to the header, which has that background color of it, the whole header is now just going to be 1440 pixels, including the background, or the you know, when I want the background color to expand the whole width of the browser. So basically, I want to apply my max width to just my H2 and just my nav, not the header. So I'm going to delete this that I've just done. And we have to think about and problem solve how we're going to do this. So in my HTML, I have my header, but I only want the H1 and nav to be a max width of 1440 pixels. So I'm going to wrap them in a div with a class of wrapper. Now I have my closing div. I need to make sure I cut that. So Command X or Control X to cut it. I'm going to indent my nav and H1 so I can clearly see that it's inside this div. And I'm going to make sure to paste the closing div. So make sure you have an opening and closing div around your H1 and your nav. With this div, I'm going to give it a class of wrapper. All right. And then in my CSS, that is what I'm going to apply the max width to. So since my wrapper is inside, or my div with the class of wrapper is inside my header, I'm just going to come right after the header styles just to keep everything nice and neat and in order. I'm going to call to that class I just made. Remember, when calling to a class, it's period and then the name that you gave it. And now let's do the max width of 1440 pixels. All right, let's have a look at it. Now we can't really tell right now. You can if you go into your developer tools, because the width of it is like pretty much already kind of small since the text is, you know, only taking up so much room. But if we hover over it, we can see that wrapper is shorter than the header. Okay, but now I want it to be centered in my browser. So to center something, we can call to the margin, and I'm going to do 0 margin for top and bottom, and auto margin for left and right. So when you do margin, the shorthand for margin, the first integer is top and bottom, and the second integer is left and right. So now when we look at this, it will stay centered in our browser window. All right, that's looking good. Okay. We will adjust the layout of it with Flexbox. So I'm not too worried right now that it's kind of close to the edge. We'll see how it looks when we do Flexbox and if we need to add some padding to it. All right, so for the next section, we have our hero section. Right now, our text is very close to the edge, and our H2, our H2 has all this extra space up here. This is the margin from the H2. So if we look in our developer tools, hover over it, it's got a lot of margin. So that's where that extra space is coming from. That is separating our header and our hero. However, for this, I'm also not going to worry about it right now, because I'm going to move this text with positioning in, I believe, the next video. So I'm not going to worry about it right now, but just keep in mind, if you have like big spaces and they're usually around your headers, your H1s, your H2s, it's usually because those have margin applied to them by default. All right, so I'm just going to close that. And I'm going to move on to my button. So my button definitely needs some space. So I'm in my hero section. So I'm going to scroll down. I'm in my hero section now. We have our button solid. So this is what I'm going to change. And basically, I want to put space within the button. I want to separate the text from the background. So if we remember, space within the content box is padding. So I'm going to add some padding here. I'm going to use the shorthand where the top or the first integer is top and bottom. So I'll just do 1 rem of space, top and bottom. And then my second integer, I'll do 3 rem. So 3 rem space, left and right. So now we've got this much more easy to read call to action button. All right, so let's move on to our next section. So this next section doesn't look too bad, but we need some space within it. This is a good amount of space. I think I want it to be a bit more. I want it to be sort of spaced and airy and light. So we're going to add some space within this section, which is padding once again. So on the top and bottom. And then also left and right. Because when the browser gets small, I want there to be a little bit of space so the text isn't butting up right against the browser window. So let's move to our exhibitions section. It looks like we're calling to our H2 or H3 dates, button outlines, but not just the section itself. So I'm going to make a new style rule. And since it's the first one in my HTML, I'm just going to do it at the top. And I'm going to call to exhibitions. And let's give it padding. Top and bottom, I want it to be quite a lot. So I'm going to do 10 rem. See how that looks? Very nice. Now you'll notice that since I just put one integer here, that means it's adding 10 rem of space, top, bottom, left, and right. So if I squish my browser, it's always going to have 10 rem on the left, which we don't want that. So we need our second integer, which specifies left and right spacing. And I'll just do 1 rem here. There we go. That looks good to me. So that's our exhibitions section. Let's take a look at our H3. Our H3 spacing is quite a lot. By the end of this, yes. So our H3, I want it to be closer to the date. Right now, the date is like very, very far down. So once again, we have to problem solve, critically think, where is this extra space coming from? So I need to go to my developer tools, have a look, hover over the space, around the space, and there it is. It's the margin that's attached to my H3. So I need to reduce that margin. So I'm going to call to my H3s, which I think I already am. Exhibitions H3, yep. And I'm going to change that margin. So margin 0. Let's just take it away completely. There we go. Much better. The date's much closer now. Okay. It's much closer. However, I want it to be even closer. So where is this little space coming from? Let's find out. So I'm going to open up my developer tools, use my little selection, and I can see that my dates has margin applied to it. Okay, so now I need to mess with the date margin. So let's go to our dates. We're already calling to it in our CSS. I'm going to change the margin to 0. Get rid of it completely. There we go. Okay. Now let's look at our paragraph right here. I want there to be more space between the date paragraph and the description paragraph. I want it to look more like this. So your eye has a little bit of time to rest between the heading and dates and then the description of it. So I need to call to this paragraph and give it some margin. Okay, so this paragraph in here does not have a class yet. But I want to call to this paragraph specifically. If I called to exhibitions P, it would apply it to both paragraphs in here, which I do not want. So let's give this paragraph its own class. So for me, it's around line 45. I'm going to come into that opening P tag. I'll give it a class and I'll call it, let's see, exhibit dash DES for description. So your class names, ID names, just make them make sense to you. For me, this is the description of the exhibit, so I went with exhibit description, or DES for short, because I didn't want to type type that long word. All right, so let's call to it in our CSS dot exhibit DES, and I will give it margin of 3 rem. There we go. So it has 3 rem of margin, top and bottom, and left and right, which I don't want. I want my text to still be left aligned with the heading and the date. So for my second integer, I'm going to use 0 to take that away. So basically only 3 rem of margin on the top and bottom of this paragraph. Okay. So it changed that paragraph, but not the others, because we haven't given the others the class. So let's do that. So I'm just going to copy the class equals exhibit description, and I'm going to apply it to the correct paragraphs. So make sure you're applying it to the correct ones. Take your time. For me, the next one is on line 61. It might be a little different for you. And then the last paragraph is starting on line 78 for me. There we go. So now we got a nice amount of space. Okay, I think that's it for our exhibit section for right now. Maybe as margin and padding goes, let's take a look at our design to make sure. Okay, so we still have our buttons to do for sure. So let's do that. So our more info buttons, they do have a class of button outline, which I am already calling to. So let's take a look at adding some space in here. So for our buttons, we need to add space. Well, first, actually, let's add our border, right? We want to have a border around these buttons. I just want a thin, like, black line. So I'm going to add a border. I'm using the shorthand for border where I specify the thickness of the border, so 1 pixel, and the color of the border, which I want to use that dark gray. And if I save it and look, you'll notice that it's not, putting that border in yet. Borders are a little bit tricky in where you have to specify the type of border that you want in order for it to appear. So there we go. I specified I want a solid border, and now it's appeared. It has to have whatever type of border that you want. So you can do solid, dashed, like embossed, I think, whatever you want to do. If I took away the 1 pixel, it would still work. It would just be a default, but I want it to be thin, so I'll do my pixel. If I took away the color, it would just go to a default color, which looks like black. Oh, whoops. So I'll bring in my darker color again. And then we have our solid. There we go. So that's our border. Now we have to add space between the text and the border, which is once again inside the content box. So that would be padding. So padding, let's try 1 rem top and bottom, 3 rem left and right. So basically the same as our other button. That looks okay. We got some things going on that we'll fix. I think I want to reduce the space on the left and right. Let's try 2 rem instead. There we go. That looks a bit more balanced to me. Okay. So now we have these two buttons button up right against each other. Let's look at what that button is. That is my View More button. I have a paragraph with a class of View More, and inside of that is my button. I'm going to call to this class the View More button class. So I can just copy it and paste, call to that View More button, and I will give it a margin. And this time I just want to add margin to the top to separate it from that other button. So I'll do margin top, 5 rem. There we go. That separated it. Now these are going a little bit behind the photos. That's okay for right now because we're actually going to change the layout later with grid. So we don't need to worry about that yet. Okay. Now let's look at our welcome section. Obviously, we need some padding in this section, right? To separate the edge of the text from the edge of its section container. So we have our section with a class of welcome. We're already applying styles to it. This section is what I want to add my spacing to. So I'll just come into the styles that are already there for me, and I will add some padding. So padding, I like to keep my padding for my sections pretty much the same. So before, my padding for the exhibit section was 10 rem, top and bottom, 1 rem, left and right. There we go. Let's take a look at this. Okay. So we got 10 rem, top and bottom, but the top one looks like more than the bottom to me. I'm sure you can guess where that extra margin is coming from. It's coming from that H2. Headings, well, pretty much everything. Headings, paragraphs, all have margin already applied to them. Just to make sure, let's look in our developer tools, and yes, so this H2 has margin on top and bottom. So I need to remove the margin that's on top. So am I already calling to this welcome H2? I am. Around line 135. So I'm going to come into this style rule. I'm going to select my margin top, and I'm going to set it to 0 just to get rid of that. Okay. And then our paragraph, let's take a look at it. Our paragraph looks okay, like the width of it when the screen is smaller, but not when it's bigger. Having to read, a long line of text is very hard for most people, so I'm actually going to reduce the width of this paragraph. So we saw me do that in the header, right? We reduced the width of the header and centered it. Basically, I'm going to do the same thing with this paragraph. So we can apply a max width of like 500 pixels and center it with margin 0 auto. However, I'm going to do something a little bit different. So this is the only paragraph within my welcome section. So I'm just going to call to the welcome space P. And I'm going to give it a maximum width, so a max width of 60 characters. So basically 60 letters. There we go. Now, studies have shown that people read like bigger paragraphs of text better at widths between 60 and 70 characters. So that's where I got the 60 characters from. Okay, but now since we applied a width to it, it's no longer centered. So let's do our centering trick with margin 0 auto. There we go. So once again, 0 margin top and bottom, an automatic margin on left and right that will grow and shrink with the browser. So let's look at that in our developer tools. So I'll hover over. There's the margin there. So it's applying an automatic amount on left and right. If I squish the browser smaller, you'll see that the margin got smaller. So instead of like saying margin 0 4 rem, I can just use auto and it'll just do the math for me, basically. Okay. So that looks like that's that section done. let's move on to the art section. So this art section needs some padding. This picture is a little bit too close to my footer. This is okay, but I like a lot more space. And I'm going to make it match my welcome section and my exhibit section. So let's go to my art section. Looks like we don't have any styles applied to this yet. We have a section with a class of art. So I'm going to call to that class. So dot art. I'm going to add the padding of 10 rem top and bottom, 1 rem left and right. Okay. Now I have to remember that my H2 has margin applied to it. So I want to get rid of that margin just so it matches very closely with the other sections. So in this section, that is an H2. So I'm going to call to that H2 specifically. So dot art H2. I will do margin top 0. There we go. Okay, let's have a look. That's pretty much the spacing we want for that section. We will do the layout of the images later. And now we have the footer section. So the footer section also needs that same padding, the 10 rem top and bottom, 1 rem left and right. Let's have a look at what it's supposed to look like. So it's supposed to be very, very big and airy. So let's call to our footer. We already are. So I'm just going to grab that same padding that we've been using and I'll apply it to the footer. Whoa. There we go. So now we have that big space of padding. Okay. And I think that should be it. Let's make sure we gotta look at it when it's big and small. Okay. All right. So we have the spacing top and bottom. I want my sections to line up with my header. What class did we give this? I forgot. But we gave that a class. Let's take a look at it. It was a class of wrapper. That's right. We gave that a class of wrapper and we gave it a max width and then we centered it. I want the rest of my text on the other sections, my upcoming exhibit sections. The welcome is centered, so that doesn't matter. Our dive into the art H2, and that doesn't matter either. Okay, so I want to apply the same styles to the art section as well as the exhibit section. That way the text and images are lined up with each other and the header up here, the navigation. So we've already applied those styles to the H1 and nav. We wrapped it in a div with a class of wrapper. So I'm going to copy that class of wrapper and I'm going to apply it to my section exhibit section class as well. So when applying multiple classes to something, you just put a space in and we'll have wrapper. But I have to make sure I spell it correctly. And we'll save it. So now this section has two classes. It has the class of exhibitions and it has the class of wrapper. That's why classes cannot have spaces in them. Otherwise it'll count it as two different classes. So we have two different classes here. Let's make it bigger and we'll see that now this class, this section is nice and lining up with our header section, our navigation. So I want to do the same for my art section. So for the art, let's find it. Section. So section class of art, for me it's on line 104, so it's probably around there for you as well. So right after the word art, I'm still in the quotes though, I'm going to put a space and I'm going to add wrapper. That way I don't have to target these individually and give them the same max width and margin. It's already applied to one class, so why not just apply that class to multiple things? Thinking about it, I probably should have made a utility class for the padding of the section, since I went through and added padding of 10 rem top and bottom, 1 rem left and right to like multiple sections. I could have done it similar to this, where I only do one style rule with a special class and then apply that class to the sections. But hindsight is 20/20. So, and there we go. Now it's a max width of 144 pixels, and it's now centered in the browser. So that is it for our spacing for this project. So stay tuned for the next video.